Welcome, everybody. We are concluding Clashing Worldviews in the U.S. Supreme Court. I could keep going, but we gotta land this plane. Okay, we've been flying in the air for quite a while, and I appreciate all of you that have been so faithful watching these, and all of those that are here. They've been awesome. They've been so faithful. And so, what we're going to talk about today is the liberty, equality, and justice under conservative Protestantism. So, for many of us that are here, that this would be our wheelhouse. Okay, and then show some reform that we proposed in the book based on the divisions in our country. Because again, because these two worldviews are incompatible, it's like oil and water. They don't mix. We believe that the solution is going back to federalism and not a nationalized, one-size-fits-all approach to a lot of these issues. Okay, and now that would be very controversial to many people, but I believe that's the only way you're going to move forward in a country where, you know, it's like, to borrow from what Abraham Lincoln said. He said, you know, America is a house divided, and a house divided can't stand. And so you've got to make some provision. And the founders of our country understood that. They understood not everyone's going to believe everything, even though there was a Judeo-Christian worldview informing them. So that's why they wanted to create this idea of federalism. In other words, let the states and the local communities decide regionally where they want to go on a lot of these issues. That's why in the Constitution, things like morals, healthcare, vaccines, okay, police power, welfare was all meant to be done at the local level, never meant to be done by the national level. They never wanted a government, they never wanted a president saying, I proclaim there is vaccine mandates on all of America. Okay, James Madison would listen and they go, no, that's totally unconstitutional. That's not for you to decide as a president. That's a state and local issue. Healthcare is a state and local issue by regions, because some regions of the country are not going to be as affected. So how in the world can you do that? That's what we're arguing for. That's, in other words, because we're not going to all agree. So let the individual states, as acting as social laboratories, 50 of them, make better decisions. That's why I look at Governor DeSantis in Florida and go, hooray, wonderful, good for you. And that's why I look at, well, current leadership in certain states closer to home with a little less enthusiasm. Yeah. Okay, so liberty, equality, and justice under Rehnquist's conservative constitution, okay? So if you took Rehnquist's worldview and you begin to apply it to a lot of these areas, what would go on, okay? So they would assume that because humans are sinful, they would choose a greater degree of ordered liberty and allow less deviation from social norms than progressive Protestants. Again, what is ordered liberty? Okay? A liberty must be ordered. The founders understood that humans are sinful, so you've got to provide some boundaries on what is marriage, what is human sexuality. We value life here, so perhaps euthanasia legalized is not a good thing. Okay? In other words, so they would see. They would look at Romans 13, where it says, what's the purpose of government? To condone the good and restrain sin. So they would have no problem with the government stepping in and saying, no, we're not going to legalize marijuana. It's not a good idea. I know you're all for freedom, but people that are beholden to that and under that influence do not think well. That's not good for, in other words, so they would limit certain things. They would say, no, we're not trying to hinder you being human, but I'm sorry, people that are high on drugs, getting behind the wheel of a car, or checking out from life and becoming a burden to the state, so now we got to finance them with welfare checks. That's not good for the country. We're going to limit that. Okay, so in other words, so they would say, liberty should not be unbounded. There needs to be some limits on liberty. Okay, so in other words, and again, you get a lot of that from Romans 13. Condone the good, restrain sin. So again, conservative Protestants are animated by the right ordering of society, as expressed by the norms of heterosexuality, monogamous heterosexual marriage, the sacred nature of parenting. In other words, the state is not, okay, take what happened in Virginia a couple of weeks ago, where Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic nominee, basically was telling parents, sorry, parents, you have no business telling us what to teach in school. Okay, that is a very progressive Protestant kind of viewpoint. We would say no. The primary responsibility of raising children and educating children is not the state, it's mom and dad. Okay, so they would be much more reluctant to give the state all kinds of power in that area. Okay, the importance of religion in public life and the concept of a fixed, permanent standard of truth. Okay, so they would be for, again, conservative Protestants, laws and policies that reduce irresponsible behavior. Is if somebody's, dude, I'm high, you know, and so they totally check out. Okay, that's irresponsible behavior because now you don't provide for your family, you're not providing for your children. Somebody addicted to gambling becomes an irresponsible parent. In other words, the money that could be used to feed the kids and clothe the kids or whatever is going to the casino. Okay, so again, a conservative Protestant would limit casinos because they realize that's just not good financial stewardship. It's just not. Okay, and they would also eliminate any perverse incentives that prevent family life from flourishing. So they would say, hey, continuing all of this unemployment benefits for people from COVID a year and a half after is irresponsible behavior because we've got all kinds of businesses that cannot even open or stay open or serve people food or whatever because it's more profitable for them to live off the government dole at home than making your hamburger at McDonald's. Okay, in other words, that's a perverse incentive. I get it, in flat and smack dab in the middle of a pandemic, I understand that. But not 18 months later, when the economy's tanking and people are desperate for workers. It's not good, you know. And so they would say, we want a federal power, what's called devolution. Okay, what is devolution? Devolution is kicking federal power and giving it back to the states. I was having this conversation last night with my daughter, who's here for a brief window of time, because she's not coming home for Thanksgiving break, because she's going to Florida with one of her friends. So she snuck out and came home for a little while. Okay, so we were talking about this, and she was saying, well, Dad, you're not pro-vaccination. You know, how could you have consistent logic on that, and then consistent logic on abortion? And I said, what do you mean? Well, if you are against abortion and you're against vaccine mandates, how would you apply that per the Constitution? Hey, I love it when your kids start getting older and you can have more in-depth conversations. And so I said, well, here's what I would say. I would say this. What does the Constitution say about health? It says that basically that's supposed to be done at the state and local level. So yeah, I'm very much against abortion. In fact, I don't just want abortion illegal, I want it to become unthinkable in America. Not just making it illegal, but I mean literally people wouldn't even think that. I would say the exact same thing about gay marriage. I would not want that just illegal, I would want it unthinkable. Because people would embrace God's view of human sexuality, and so that type of lifestyle, people wouldn't even think of that in their mind. Now, but I'm saying that from a constitutional perspective, this is what I would say, because this is what I said to my daughter. I said, if abortion, if Roe versus Wade gets struck down, because the court is hearing a case, I think this week, about it, okay, what would happen? Again, all the liberals and all the groups, oh my gosh, we can't get abortions, and now women are going to get abortions in a back alley with a coat. And like, no, that doesn't mean that at all. All that means is the national straitjacket has been removed. And it gives it back to all 50 states to choose for themselves what they want. And that also gives every person in those states a voice that they didn't have when Roe versus Wade was decided, and muted all of us and kept us without a voice. So I said, Lex, I would say that about abortion. I would say that about gay marriage. Yeah, I've got some pretty strong ideas that I think that gay marriage is wrong. However, from a constitutional perspective in our country, we would need to just remove Obergefell, strike it down, and get it back to the states where it was before. That's what you let the people decide in their states. And if you don't like it, you can move to Texas or Florida or something like that. Yeah, it's disruptive, but it would allow the states to be inhabited by people, birds of a feather, flock together. So this one-size-fits-all constitutional straitjacket through the courts, I would say stop it. Stop doing that. That's wrong. Okay? Now, as I say that, if somebody watches this, it's a liberal, they would say, oh my gosh, you're against civil rights. No, I'm not. I'm for truth. And I'm for freedom. And I'm for the principles of the Constitution that said if you want to make gay marriage the law of the land, then get legislation through Congress or create an amendment. If you can't do that, you can't win the hearts of American people, then you lose. Because that's how the framers set it up. They never meant all of this stuff microwaved and doing an end around the people through the court system. Never meant it that way. Never meant it that way. Anyway, that's, okay. Have I made my point? Okay. Okay, so you know, the other thing that would happen if you kick stuff back down to the states, okay, the social spheres of cultural engagement would become more important in communities as bulwarks against the unjust use of state power. What did I just say? I just said, you know what becomes a lot more important now if you kick it out of the states and local communities? The local church. Voluntary organizations. What's called the civil society. Do we really have to rely upon the federal government for welfare? I'm not saying the church doesn't have deep enough pockets, but the flip side is everyone who's getting welfare, are they deserving of it? Or are a vast majority of them able-bodied people that should be working? In other words, if you do that, okay, you can reduce the tax burden on the nation. You can cause people that are living off the government dole to start living lives of dignity and value and contribution. And to me, that's very humanizing. You know what's very dehumanizing? An able-bodied man or woman that's sitting at home collecting a welfare check. That's very dehumanizing. That's not how God made you. In other words, so we would say that gets humanity back to the original design of God. Now others would say, well, that's heartless. No, somebody, an able-bodied man or woman who refuses to work, that's dehumanizing. If you don't work, you don't eat. Okay, so in other words, so it causes local communities to be. In other words, it should force us as the church to step it up, get involved, give, help the poor, do these things because the government's not doing it. Okay, yeah, it would force a mindset change, not just in unbelieving people, but even the church, because we're so quick to punt to the government in so many areas. Okay, and it would cause people to want to step it up. Alexis de Tocqueville, in his Democracy in America, when he came to the United States in 1830s, the thing that three things struck him immediately in America that said it was so different than France. First of all, religion. It's like people were like serious Christians here, and they did not have any freedom and religion work together. Okay, in France they were totally apart. You cannot be free if you're religious. In America, you can be free. The most free people are those that are free in Christ and serving Jesus. He was like, whoa, okay, that amazes me. The second thing he saw was there were so many voluntary organizations. So many churches and clubs and whatever. In other words, he said something like this, I'm paraphrasing, okay? When a community or when a person decides to, this big project, they want to raise a barn, they don't go to the government. They get their family together and they get their neighbors together and they put the barn up. You know, they get all the materials and they do it. And he said, yeah, what they build is maybe not as big as the government would have, but you multiply this times millions of people, and the collective activity of what these people are doing far exceeds anything the government could do. In other words, we're not waiting for the government to get something done. We just do it. We're not waiting for, FEMA to come in. We're sending financial aid to a flood victims area immediately. Okay, so that was the second thing. All these voluntary organizations. Whoa. And the third thing he says, you know where the power is in government? You know where the action is in the government? In the counties, not in Washington. You want to see activity? You want to go where the action is in politics? Look at these local communities, how they get together and how rambunctious they are in their local meetings. That's how they get things done. Those three things is what, there was others, but those were some of the three main ones that he was saying, whoa, America's different than France and Europe. They do, religion is really important to them. They volunteer like crazy, and government's at the local level. That's where the power's at. Is that a little different today? Yeah, okay. So in other words, that's where conservative Protestants would land. Strengthen local communities to make their decisions. Without overbearing federal mandates, there's more freedom for local communities to become self-governing in a variety of ways, from education to environmental stewardship to religious liberty. Taxes would go down. Think of all the taxes. Think of how much money you would have right now if, instead of being forced to have paid into Social Security, you could have kicked all that money that was forcibly taken in your taxes to an IRA or something. Most of you would be millionaires. If, from the age of 21, 22, you could have kicked your money into some sort of an IRA type of thing, most of you would be retired as millionaires. How different? Okay, in other words, that's what we would add. That's what a conservative Protestant would advocate. No, who's responsible for my retirement? The government or me? Well, the government. I can't wait for the check for the $1,200 a month I get. Do you understand how much more money you would have had if you would have just... But again, when laws are didactic, what is didactic? It means they teach. So stuff like that's been in the works since the 1930s. And I understand the Great Depression and all that kind of stuff, but the assumption that FDR in his brain trust made is when they kicked in Social Security, the average person was going to live to be 67 years old. So you're only supporting people for 2 years. Now we're living into our 90s. William Shatner, I'm going into space, I'm in my 90s. So you're supporting people for upwards of 25, 30 years beyond. It's not going to last. Anyway, okay.
Killing off the young people in abortions, so there's no money coming in.
Yeah. So,
But you got a no one working, so that even takes more money out of it.
yeah.
Nobody's putting
Yeah,
anything.
with all this extra debt, we're basically hampering not just our children, but our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. They're going to be footing the bill for our indulgence in our own generation. I'm sorry, I'm saying this, hope this doesn't get banned on YouTube, but the current infrastructure bill and all this added debt that's going on in the last couple of years, it's indulgent. These politicians are self-indulgent. They're burdening future generation. It's wrong. It should be stopped. They should repent. They should. It's wrong. We do not. The current infrastructure bill, as I understand it, that was just passed, $1 trillion something, only 20% of it goes to infrastructure. Fred Upton voted on it because he thought it was a great thing. 80% of it goes to all kinds of socialistic policies and fostering the Green New Deal. That's not good law. Don't call it an infrastructure bill. Call it but they bait and switch all the time. Sorry, did I state my opinion? Okay, moving on.
It's true.
Liberty. Okay, I'm going to go through these quickly because I want to get to the solutions. Okay? So liberty, again, it's not unbridled will. Unbridled will for people with a sinful nature would leads to anarchy and totalitarianism in some way, shape, or form. And that's this expressive individualism that undergirds the sexual revolution. If I am a man who feels trapped, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, I should be able to change my identity based on what I feel. Okay? A conservative Protestant looking at the Bible, realizing that the heart is deceitfully wicked, right? No, that's called sin. You don't elevate a temptation to the level of law. Why would you want to elevate a temptation and make it a law and force everyone to recognize the temptation that you've given into? That's a temptation. You can resist it. In Christ, you can resist it. Even if you're not in Christ. Biology is not bigotry. Birds and bees, male and female. It's not that complicated. As I told a youth group back when I was pastoring in Illinois, hey guys, gals, just check out the plumbing. It's different. Okay. So again, conservative Protestants would again go back to this golden triangle of freedom. If you remember, I've talked about this many times. But if you want to be a free people, you have to be a people of virtue. Virtue is a word that most people don't think about anymore, but virtue means excellence. It means living, it means to be fully human, living up to your, well, from the classical view, but they wouldn't say this, but we would say this, your God-given design, how God made you. My utmost for his highest. If you've got a society of people that are living my utmost for his highest, you can be a free people and you don't need much government. Because you're not going to be violating the speed limit. And you're not going to be shoplifting. And you're not going to be engaged in riots. And you're not, think it through. All the jails would be empty. Every prison warden would be out of a job. You could divert that money elsewhere because you don't need prisons, because everyone is living in a virtuous way. So, okay. So when I say that, then government can be small. government can be cheap. Because if everyone is living in a virtuous way, you don't need traffic cops, and you don't need police, and you don't need all kinds of things. You don't need riot police, you're not burning Seattle, you're not creating Chaz, right, the autonomous zone, where we don't want government or police. You don't have that foolishness. But in order for virtue to flourish, faith has got to flourish. In other words, you've got to have religious freedom. If the government starts telling you how to think about certain things, then you lose your freedom. So in other words, it requires all three of these. Okay? Again, this idea of the golden triangle of freedom. Where did I get that phrase from? From Os Guinness in his book, A Free People's Suicide. He goes into this in the book, The Last Call for Liberty. He talks about this in depth. And again, he's coining a phrase that the framers understood. Okay, this is Alexis de Tocqueville. Okay, liberty cannot be established without morality, but morality cannot be established without faith. You have to have all three of those. If government starts suppressing religion and says religious liberty is bad for people because it hurts people, because religious people are mean. They say that homosexuals cannot get married. Religious people are mean. They're preventing a transgender person from enjoying freedom and liberty. Okay? If we start going that way, don't be surprised if government, again, starts creating things called hate crimes and hate speech and things like that. In other words, you start losing your liberty in a lot of ways. This is what else Alexis de Tocqueville said in Democracy in America. Again, his book that he wrote about America in the 1830s. How is it possible that society should escape destruction if the moral tie be not strengthened in proportion as the political tie is relaxed? And what could be done with a people which is its own master if it is not submissive to the divinity? So if we are our own masters, and we are free, and we don't need government to tell us the size of our soft drink, because we can't govern ourselves in what we eat, right? Then we better be submissive to God. To the degree to which you're moral is the degree to which government can increase or decrease. The more moral you are as a people, the more submitted you are to God, the less government you have. The less submitted you are to God, the less submitted you are to being moral people, then don't be surprised if you got more government getting involved. Okay, Alexis de Tocqueville that's why this is such a great book, and I use Alexis de Tocqueville so much in my secular classes on American national government, because he does all the heavy lifting for me. I don't have to be accused of preaching the gospel or something. It's like, hey, just go, Alexis. I let Alexis do the. I'm not big on the French, but I'm a huge fan of Alexis de Tocqueville. I love this guy. Alexis de Tocqueville. All right. So again, liberty is understood within a memetic view of the world. Okay. Remember, we talked about this with the progressives. There's two ways of looking at the world: the poetic view or the memetic view. Okay? The memetic view is, hey, I conform myself to reality. It's God's world. You're going to live best if you live in alignment with God's world. Very practical, easy. If you violate the law of gravity and you say it doesn't exist, I don't believe in it, I'm going to socially construct reality and say I don't believe in gravity, I'm going to ignore it. You can ignore it at your own peril, because you will die. Right? In other words, I am a woman trapped in a man's body. Okay? That is the poetic view of the world. I conform reality to my own feelings and preferences. I make my own fantasy world becomes real. I'm ignoring my biology. I'm ignoring gravity. I'm ignoring the law of sowing and reaping, and I'm creating my own reality, and you must recognize that's the poetic view. So conservative Protestants realize it's God's world. You're going to live best if you live in alignment with it. There really is something called sin, and so it must be restrained. You cannot give full vent to all of your feelings and preferences, because the heart of man is deceptive. And so government must step in sometimes and restrain that, for not just for your own good, but also for the good of the community. Because if we raise a new generation of young people who are in their 20s, 30s, that don't understand what a male and a female is, what is that going to do to little children in the future if there's confusion? Because we would say children deserve a mom and a dad. We all talk about human rights and adult. I have a right to choose whoever I love. Love wins. Well, do children have a right? Do children have a right to a mom and a dad? How about that? Okay, if you're for equal rights, because equal rights are not absolute. I mean, rights are not absolute. Okay? Your right ends when it starts encroaching on the right of someone else. And if that right encroaches on the right of little children to have a mom and a dad, then perhaps your sexuality needs to be bridled and reined in, and you need to start thinking about something more than yourself, you narcissist. Okay? You know, so in other words, that's what that means, okay? So a memetic view of the world views the world as having a given order and a given meaning, and thus human beings are required to discover that meaning and conform themselves to it. Right? If you continually eat pizza late at night, and Twinkies, and Mountain Dew, and goodies and snacks, you will not feel well. Your stomach, well, I don't believe it. I'm going to create a socially constructed reality where none of that affects me because I think I'm Superman. Sooner or later, reality, a memetic view of the world says, wait a minute, hold on. Conform yourself to reality. How about eating good things? You know, how about getting enough sleep? All that kind of stuff, okay? So again, in a memetic view of the world, the self conforms itself to reality. You conform yourself to the real world. Biology is not bigotry. Plumbing matters. C.S. Lewis talks about this in The Abolition of Man, probably my favorite C.S. Lewis book. It's only like 60 pages, it's not long. He says, and he's talking about, again, what happens when people disregard God, when they disregard God's laws, when reality becomes what I feel, and I can manipulate reality however I think and feel. He says of them, it is not that they're bad men, they are not men at all. In other words, it leads to dehumanization. Stepping outside the Tao, okay, the Tao is his word for the natural law. He's using it from the Christian standpoint, but also other pagan religions. And listen, he's trying to basically, you don't have the whole chapter here, but he's trying to make an argument. Even non-believing people have a natural law. Romans 2, 14, 15, the people that don't have the law still live it. He's making that argument. Okay? So if you step outside that natural law, you step into a void. And it leads to dehumanization. Man's final conquest has proved to be the abolition of man. Okay, I'm going to conquer nature. I know I've got a human nature. I know I'm a man, but I think myself as a woman, and I'm going to change my whole preferences based on it. He says, listen, if you try to conquer that, it actually leads to the abolition of what it means to be human. That's how a conservative Protestant would look at things. Does that make sense? Is that a little too deep this morning? You understand what he's saying? What he's saying is incredibly powerful. We live in a generation of people that are all stepping into this void, and they're all becoming dehumanized. And they think they're free, and they think we're the bad guys. And we're like Willy Wonka looking at Augustus Gloop going into the chocolate river, and he's about ready to get stuck in that tube, and we're like Willy Wonka going, wait, stop, don't, come back, as they're going off into oblivion. And they're cursing us as we're trying to rescue them. Okay? Again, we need to look at people that are beholden to a progressive worldview as sinners in need of Jesus. They are not enemies to be exterminated. They are captives to be liberated. Okay. So again, liberty also means government must be limited in its power and sphere of authority. Okay? Liberty is the right for a person to be left alone to pursue the good life as long as he acts responsibly toward his fellow man. Somebody's sitting around, this logic, this minimalist ethics that progressives advance. Hey, I can do whatever I want in the privacy of my own home as long as no one else gets hurt, okay? A conservative Protestant would say, wait a minute, hold on. In the same way as you are aware of the natural ecology and pollution, okay, we would say there is a moral universe you live in, and so the way you live privately affects people publicly, and so certain behaviors, such as maybe getting high at home and legalizing marijuana, that might not be best for society, okay? That is not acting responsibly toward your fellow man, because, again, we've talked about, if you drive in a car or live off the government dole and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so a conservative Protestant would say new liberties not expressly written in the Constitution, abortion, gay rights, They weren't in the original. They weren't in America's founding. We would say, whoa, then why are you trying to introduce these things? And if you are trying to introduce these things, don't try to introduce it through the courts. Act like a man and lobby in the public square in your local communities if you think your ideas are so great. Don't try to sideswipe. Okay? So they would say, listen, the courts would no longer use the due process clause to discover and support substantive due process. Okay, again, that's a little technical constitutional language. Remember, in the 14th Amendment, there are three particular areas. It granted the freed slaves three rights: due process under the law, right? The right to remain silent. Okay, jury trial, right to a lawyer, habeas corpus, privileges and immunities, and equal protection. What the progressives have done is they keep looking at that 14th Amendment of the due process clause and say, wait a minute, you're preventing somebody, again, take the sexual revolution, you're preventing somebody from enjoying liberty, the liberty they want to enjoy. That's a violation of the due process clause, because the due process clause says government may not take away your life, liberty, or property except by due process of law. So they're claiming, hey, I should have the right to have freedom in this particular area, whatever, okay? And that's how they're arguing. So conservative Protestants will say, no, you can no longer use that clause anymore. That doesn't apply. That liberty is novel, it's new, it's never been before recognized, and it definitely is not in the Constitution, because the due process clause, after all, applied to the freed African American slaves, not interest group X that wants a new right. So they would narrowly interpret the due process clause. Progressives want to broaden that sucker to include every person that feels offended, every person that feels oppressed. Come to the watering trough of the due process clause, and you can get your right. Because after all, the courts are just going to be sympathetic to you. A conservative Protestant say, no, you can't. That's not what it's for. It was free. Are you a freed African American slave? Oh, you're not? You're not even an African American? Well, you can't go there. You just can't go there. That's not for you. Get your own amendment. Get your own legislation. Okay? I realize I'm not making friends, but that's the correct way to interpret the Constitution. If you want to have limited government, if you want to have federal government just continually get big and bloated, then keep doing this. Because every time that the Supreme Court does this and expand the due process clause, because who's doing it? The Supreme Court. Who's the Supreme Court? It's the national government, and the states and their rights are being diminished in the process. Again, and so they would say equality is again equal opportunity under law. I just finished a new blog entry. Be watching for it this week. It's about equality and about what does equality mean. I mean, really, okay? Thomas Jefferson said, you know, we're given inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. All men are created equal. What does that equality mean? Does it mean equality of opportunity, or does it mean equality of outcome? Well, what's the difference? Well, equality of opportunity is, hey, everyone has a right to go to college, but not everyone will, because you might not be sharp enough intellectually. You might not have enough money. But if you really want to, you can if you really try hard. But even if you don't, it's not like you're prevented from trying. But we're not saying that perhaps you're going to be given a slot in college if you're not intellectually ready. Equality of outcome says, oh, that's really sad. That's really too bad. You're oppressing somebody from preventing them from going to college. We need to give them free government money, and we need to give them a spot, because everyone deserves a college education, even if you're not qualified. So here you go. Equality of outcome is this idea that the government is going to push some people up that maybe, you know, are unable or unwilling or are unqualified, and perhaps push some other people down to get there. What do you mean by pushing other people down? Well, it might mean, because if you provide free college education for people year after year after year, you're extracting tax dollars from everyone else. You're pushing my budget, your Ruth's budget, Joanna's budget, Debbie's budget is being impacted so you can lift somebody else. What else does equality of outcome mean? It means affirmative action. So somebody who's applying for college, who is a minority person, who does not have as high of a test score as somebody who is a white person, well, they are allowed to go to college or go into that grad school, even though the white person had a higher GPA and a higher graduate test score, so that person cannot go. Okay? That's equality of outcome. Some government picks winners and losers. Okay? Equality of opportunity is government does not pick winners and losers. Government just provides a level playing field. And then what you do with it is on you. Oh, you didn't get into college this year? Then how about you bust it hard and take a bunch of extra classes or whatever and take testing prep and try it next year.
Right.
And the next year. And the next year. And while you're doing it, you work a couple of jobs to make plenty of money so you can finance your own education yourself and you don't need a government loan. In other words, it's not like you're prevented, it's an equal, but people are awarded based on merit in this system. See the difference? Anyway, I just wrote a blog entry. It deals with this in a lot more detail. But so does that make sense? Okay, so again, equality is grounded outside the box. Okay, in other words, our equality is because we're made in the image of God. So everyone has an opportunity. You cannot prevent people from being equal. Okay, in other words, everyone's equal. Everyone's an image bearer. So government, you cannot prevent people from entering certain things. But again, the parable of the talents. Some people just earn more. There's people that earn more than me. There's people that are smarter than me. People that are better than me, faster than me, better look. But that doesn't mean the government needs to step in and push them down so I can feel better about myself. Does that make sense? But equality of outcome says that. In fact, what I reference, I encourage you to look it up. It's a short story by Kurt Vonnegut called Harrison Bergeron. It's only like 3 or 4 pages long. But it's a dystopian little short story. And it begins with this, I'm paraphrasing. And the year was 2081. And everybody was finally equal. The 212th, 213th, and 214th amendments were passed and enforced by the handicapper general to make it possible. And he goes on to share the story of, again, I could just give you a quick example of this. So there's a husband who's very, very smart, who's married to a wife who's not the sharpest tool in the shed. So what the government does is they implant a sensor in his ear. So every time he gets a deep thought, every 10 seconds, this blood-curdling loud noise goes off in his ear that stops him from thinking, so that he's at the same intellectual level as his wife. And he's stronger than his wife, and he's more athletic. So he has to wear like this 20-pound extra belt and things to make him more awkward so he can slow down. Okay, and it follows this, again, it's equality of outcome. He's trying to show, okay, what are the logical conclusions of a world in which everyone is made equal by the government? Would we want to live in that kind of world? Okay, so conservative Protestants will say, no. Hey, we look at parable of the talents as a great example. Hey, it's kind of on you, it's kind of on me. God gave us all different gifts. Now we're supposed to discover those gifts. We're supposed to do it, whatever God told us to do. But whether we're successful or not or whatever, that's kind of up to God and our own initiative here. We're not going to look to the government to make me successful. It would be like me going, you know what? I've been in ministry for 31 years and I've worked really hard and all that kind of stuff. I deserve, a mega church too. Can you pull? And so the government comes in and forcibly extracts 3,000 people from Joel Osteen's church and makes them come to our church. That would be equality of outcome. Because we all need to feel, and my self-esteem and my pride is hurt, and my feelings are hurt, and I'm jealous. So that would be equality of outcome. Because and in that type of a thinking, who has to get really, really big to make that happen? The government does. Okay, so conservative Protestants will say no, and if you go our direction, it's going to keep the government small. It's going to keep your taxes smaller, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay. And then of course justice. They want, again, a standard of good and evil. Okay. I want to do this just because, for the sake of time. Okay. And if you want to get the rest of the information, buy my book, and it's on sale for $30. I've got it in soft cover. So reach out to me, Pastor Eric at lmcc.church, and I can hook you up. All right. Just have a little fun here. I'm trying to find something here that I thought. Okay, so to achieve the ideals depicted, this is important, okay, because I don't have time to go into the conservative Protestant view of reproductive rights. We kind of know that. Sexuality, we know that. property. We've kind of talked about all this, right? So it's not like a surprise. But in order to get there, in other words, in order for parents to have more rights and not the government, in order for abortion to be made illegal at the national level and give the people rights in states, in order to make gay marriage not the law of land, not law of the land, but to give each individual state a choice, you're going to have to basically strike down Supreme Court cases, and you have to probably write some amendments. So that's what we say. To achieve the ideals depicted, the Supreme Court, Congress, or a constitutional convention must overrule or override by amendment many Supreme Court precedents that currently bar some of the activities below. Okay, so in other words, in order to get back to, we would say, a conservative Protestant way of doing things, but I would go on to say a constitutional way of doing things. Okay, in other words, that there's to remove the power from the national government in a lot of areas that, quite frankly, they had no business constitutionally getting into. Again, it would require the Supreme Court's decisions need to be overridden, Congress would need to write new laws, or a constitutional convention, literally creating brand new amendments, would actually have to happen. Well, what are you saying, Pastor E? I'm saying the die has been cast, and save an intervention from God, this is not going to happen. In other words, there are some things that have happened constitutionally that are so deep and embedded, it would literally take an amendment system. And what is an amendment? Okay, how do you get an amendment passed? It takes 2/3 of the Congress to vote for it, and then 3/4 of the states to agree to it. Okay, that is a very high bar. Okay, but the founders did it that way because, listen, no social engineering without, the people's consent. And so what's been happening with the Supreme Court, a lot of these decisions, it's major social engineering. It's major social experimentation without the people's consent. So yes, it would be a high bar for conservative Protestants to get back to that, but it was meant to be a hard bar for the progressives too, in the areas of abortion, in the areas of gay marriage, and homosexual rights too. 2/3 of Congress, 3/4 of the states. Could they have gotten it? No, they couldn't have. What are you saying, Pastor E? I'm saying Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy. It's really it's constitutional theft that has happened to some degree. To where thievery has happened. You're not playing by the rules, so to speak. Well, the church, they played by the rules. They went to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court had any, what's the word I want to say? Self-control, they would say, no, we're not going to even take this case. But in many cases, the court has been eager. In fact, Antonin Scalia, in his dissent in the case of Windsor, the Windsor case in 2013, that struck down the Defense of Marriage Act, okay? That case should have never been ruled out by the Supreme Court. Why? Because the Obama administration refused to enforce the Defense of Marriage Act, and the lesbians in this case, a lower court decided in their favor. Okay, so if a lower court decided in their favor, and the Justice Department is not enforcing defense of marriage, because they, as lesbians, they wanted certain financial rights that would come from marriage. According to the Supreme Court, they have no standing. In other words, there's no ability for the court to hear the case because their needs have already been satisfied in a lower level. Okay? The court took it anyway because they wanted to intentionally get rid of the Defense of Marriage Act. And Antonin Scalia in his dissent was just withering fire. He's like, listen, he says, I'm paraphrasing, he says, the court is eager, hungry to take up. In other words, the court is not supposed to do that. The court does not, it is not an active part of the federal government. It's passive. It's got to wait until a case and a controversy bubbles up that has never been resolved at a lower level. Then they can hear it. They intentionally reached in and took it. Okay, that's a power grab, or that's constitutional thievery. And Scalia knew it clearly, and he wrote about it. Go read his dissent in U.S. v. Windsor. It was a 2013 case. And he just says, he basically says this when he concludes his argument. He says, what are we even doing here? We shouldn't even be here. And he's right. He's right. But you've got so many of these progressives that are on the homosexual rights bandwagon. They knew, hey, we'll defeat, because the Defense of Marriage Act was affirmed by 95% of Congress in 1995 or 1998 and signed for by Bill Clinton. So, I mean, you had the vast majority of Congress and the president said this is a good thing. And the courts, sorry, anyway. Okay, so let's get into this real quick. I'm going to talk about what needs to happen, okay, to kind of fix this, or what are solutions, okay? So starting Reformation, okay? Congress can limit what it's creating, okay? Article 3 of the Constitution says this. It only provides for a Supreme Court. So the federal court system is 3 levels. You've got the district courts, you've got the appellate courts or appeals courts, and then you've got the Supreme Court. Okay? The district court and the appeals courts are not in the Constitution. But Article 3 says that Congress can create them as they need them. So Congress could remove some of these courts, okay, if they wanted to. I'm just showing you what Constitution they could do. Okay? An important one that they've never done is in Article 3, it says that Congress can modify the appellate jurisdiction of the courts. What is the appellate jurisdiction? Appellate is a big word for appeals. Okay, so let's say, I'll just talk about abortion. This could be homosexual rights. This could be a lot of novel social experiments. Okay, let's say the Congress says, you know what? This issue of abortion is still not resolved. I know what Roe versus Wade says, but let's be honest, America is divided on abortion. We think because of that division, it should never be ruled on by the courts. So, any issue involving abortion cannot be appealed to federal courts. It must be settled at the state level. Okay? Congress can do that. That could be done in homosexual rights or anything like that. In other words, something that involves a social concern that involves all Americans, men and women, boys and girls, whatever. That's not something for the federal government. That's something for the states and their court systems and their people to decide. Congress can do that. Congress never has. Why has Congress never done that? Well, because they're wimps. Why are they wimps? Because so they don't have to, so Upton or pick your congressman doesn't have to stand up and put their view on gay marriage. Hey, I'll just let the court decide, right? Because I'm up for election. Why would I want to take a stand on immigration or take a stand on abortion? My view is irrelevant because I know the courts, so they punt, they wimp out. But they could do that. In other words, could that solve a lot of these problems? Yeah. Again, Michigan, as liberal as it is, might be pro-abortion and pro-gay marriage, but the point is, it gives the people a voice now to say something. It allows democracy to happen. Okay? So they could do that. Okay? Congress can lower the financial incentives in taking certain categories of civil rights cases by eliminating the fee awards. So in other words, if there's because a lot of these lawyers, they can be money hungry. I'll just leave it at that. So they see somebody whose gay rights were violated. Well, if you can win a case like that, you could be awarded like tons of money. So you eliminate that incentive. That's what we're saying. In other words, you can't get tons of money by taking this case. In fact, you can get next to nothing. Now, do you really want? Because if you really want to do it, if it's really worth your while, you'll do it because of the principle, not because of the money. That's okay. A constitutional amendment could establish term limits for Supreme Court justices. Right? Because right now the justices are on for life. They can only be removed, well, they stay on as long as they exhibit what says good behavior. Well, what does that mean? It's so ambiguous, there's no way you could ever, you would have to do something really, really bad. So those are some things that can be done. Congress, in other words, Congress has the power to do all of this. But they don't, but they could. And again, I believe, and I don't think I'm wrong, that a big reason why they don't is because they're wimps. Again, far easier to let the court be, the tomatoes thrown at the court for their bad decision than me not getting reelected. Because after all, it's all about me. Okay. Sorry, I'm being playful. Y'all just chill. All of you getting upset out there in YouTube land. I'm having fun, okay? A constitutional amendment could provide for retention elections for justices when they complete their term of office. So they serve 8-year terms, and then they're up for election. The American people could say, hey, vote up or down. Again, these are suggestions we're making. A far more radical idea would be to reduce significantly the power of the federal government, thereby returning the authority to the states for the general safety, welfare, and morals of the residents. Okay, I never said that. This reduction would require very significant change in Article 1, Section 8. Okay, what is Article 1, Section 8? Article 1, Section 8 in the Constitution, Article 1 is the Congress. In Article 1, Section 8, there are a series of enumerated powers. Okay, what's an enumerated power? This is all you can do. The founders thought that Congress would be the most powerful branch of government. So most of the enumerated powers of what this is all you can do are in there. Okay, a lot less in Article 2. They thought the president would be a lot weaker, and they hardly have any requirements for the court. You don't even have to have a law degree to be on the Supreme Court. So there's hope for me. Okay, so anyway, okay, but within Article 1, Section 8, power to tax, power to fund the armies, power to create a post office, very specific things. In other words, the idea is after that you can't do anything. Okay, so that's what we're saying. Listen, these enumerated powers would need to be changed. Okay, and they would need to be restrained by the elimination of or the rewording of the necessary and proper clause. Now here's where the federal government got a lot bigger. Here's why we have welfare. Here's why we have Social Security. Here's why we have Obamacare. Okay? Because there's something that says after all these enumerated powers, and then it says Congress also has all the powers that are necessary and proper for executing all these other enumerated powers. Okay? What does necessary and proper mean? Well, that can mean a lot of whatever the Supreme Court wants it to mean, right? So the nickname for the necessary and proper clause is called the rubber band clause. You can stretch that thing and make it whatever you want. So I'll just give you a quick example, how much time we got. So when Social Security was proposed by the Congress and FDR, okay, where does welfare provision come in the Constitution? It does say in the preamble that, and it does say in Article 1, that Congress may provide for the general welfare. General welfare doesn't mean welfare checks. It just means the general well-being, okay? So the Supreme Court basically said, you know what? This necessary and proper clause, is it necessary and proper to help the American people in a time of a Great Depression who've lost all their retirement? Yeah, we're going that direction. So they expanded, okay? We would say, hey, get rid of that necessary and proper clause because that is like the loophole that created Obamacare and all these other radical big government programs of entitlements. Because again, if it's necessary and proper, well, and what the court has chosen to do is say that basically there's very little limits whatsoever. Okay. In other words, they hardly bat an eye at a lot of these huge programs because they say, hey, courts already decided in earlier cases necessary and proper clause. We would say either reword it or get rid of that sucker. Because that sucker is creating this, it's a hole that a Mack truck can drive through. And Congress can just ram all these programs through. Where does it say that the government is supposed to provide for the Green New Deal in the Constitution? In other words, if that infrastructure bill gets challenged and the Green New Deal, a lot of it got funded through that, it would probably be upheld because of that. So we would say get rid of that. Because that's allowing Mack trucks that don't need to drive through that. Okay. Another constitutional modification needed would be an amendment to the Supremacy Clause found in Article 6. Okay. The Supremacy Clause in Article 6 says this Constitution will be the supreme law of the land, which makes sense. Okay. But if the Supreme Court, through the Due Process Clause, is bringing all these new liberty rights into the mainstream of American culture, bypassing the states and using the Supremacy Clause as justification, we would say perhaps you need to remove that or reword it so that it doesn't, in other words, so that states have a recourse, say, wait a minute, you can't do that. Does that make sense? Again, I'm using a little constitutional law, forgive me if it gets a little deep, okay? So the amended Supremacy Clause would read as follows, okay? Except as provided in the 10th Amendment. In other words, right now it doesn't say that. What's the 10th Amendment? All the powers not delegated to the national government are reserved to the states and the people. So we're saying, hey, make the 10th Amendment more important. Okay? except as provided in the 10th Amendment, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. Okay, in other words, 10th Amendment takes a priority, but then beyond that, the laws of the federal government stand. Again, what are we doing? We're trying to give some breathing. This is devolution. This is devolving power from the national government, giving back to the states and back to the people. Does that make sense? Cool? Okay. Moving on here. The sixth, and then we would say, listen, change the 10th Amendment. Okay? So what it currently says is this. We would add this. So the 10th Amendment currently says, the power is not expressly delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to it by the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people, notwithstanding anything in the Constitution or the laws of the United States to the contrary. So it's saying all this power that the federal government doesn't have, it goes back down to the states and the people, okay? But then it says, notwithstanding anything in the Constitution, in other words, it does except where the federal government says it doesn't. We would add, a state will, by duly ratifying an amendment to its Constitution, render any past or future decision of the United States Supreme Court void as to itself and its residents, and the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution shall not apply in such cases. So you understand what we're saying? We're saying, listen, okay, we're going to add something. So the Supreme Court makes a decision. Okay, we don't want gay marriage in Michigan. We can lobby our state representatives. They can create a convention, create an amendment to the Michigan Constitution, and say in Michigan, gay marriage won't apply. That's what we're saying. Is this controversial? Yeah. Will a lot of people be squawking? Yeah. Will it restore the framers' constitution? Yeah, it will. In other words, there's some radical things we're asking for, but you're going to have to do some radical things just to get back to the beginning. Does that make sense? So this, again, this removes power from the federal government. Make sense? Are we all glassy-eyed? This is boring, or you kind of understand that? Okay.
Go in.
Yeah. I encourage you to read the last about 5 to 10 pages of the book to see this more in depth. But I would be all for, well, of course I was, we wrote this, okay? And to be totally transparent, much of this was written by James Davids, who is a constitutional scholar and worked in the White House, okay? He was like, we talked about this. He goes, hey, what do you think about this? Oh, that's a great idea. What do you think? And we, and I said, Jim, just go for it. This is your wheelhouse, man. And he's sharp. And Sharina added a lot of stuff too. But I helped somewhat, but a lot, I have to give credit where credit's due. This is where you see the brilliance of the people I worked with. They're just like, okay. Conservatives share the same feelings on Roe versus Wade and Obergefell v. Hodges, again, the gay marriage case, as progressives feel about District of Columbia versus Heller, gun rights, and Citizens United. Corporations may make contributions to campaigns. Okay? In other words, this is our conclusion. This is the stunning finale. Okay. In other words, this is not just conservatives ranting against progressives in the conclusion of the book. Both sides have issues with certain cases. Both sides feel like, wait a minute, the American people were muzzled. They weren't able to have a voice. Okay. We're trying to make it clear, hey, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Both sides are not happy, okay? So we would say, since each state would have the same ability to revoke Supreme Court precedent, voters in the states would be able to decide whether they want to ban the intrastate sale and possession of guns, gay marriage, abortions, corporate campaign contributions for state elections. If the elimination of any current rights is so offensive to someone in one state, that person would have the option of leaving to another state. If you're offended about abortion, there's no place you can go. Right? If you're offended about gay marriage, there's no place you can go. If you're offended about gun rights, there's no place you can go. So again, the framers thought the individual 50 states would function as social laboratories. Hey, what's working in one state, maybe other states will look at it and go, yeah, that's a good idea. Hey, DeSantis, right? No vaccinations, no masks. And they got lower rates of COVID than any other state. Many states in the north and many states that are liberal have all these draconian vax mandates or mask mandates and shutdowns, and it's out of control. Now you could say, wait a minute, it's Florida, the climate's better. Maybe, I don't know, maybe. A lot more people there, it seems like, they're all moving there. Okay, so in other words, so it serves as either a good example or a sobering warning, hey, don't do this kind of stuff. Okay? That's how our system of government was meant to be set up. Okay? What messed it up? Well, I don't want to go long, but the Civil War did it. Okay? Because again, many of these states in the South that were advocating pro-slavery were like, hey, just states' rights, let us decide. Is there something so egregious and wrong that nationally we need to weigh in? I say slavery probably counts. Gay marriage? Abortion? We would say not so much. Progressives would say, yeah. We would say, hey, then make it fair. Kick it back down to the states and let the states decide. That's the fairest way. We, the people, no longer have a uniform, again, this is our conclusion. We, the people, no longer have a uniform worldview. And although national interests converge on some matters, they diverge on others. And allowing one worldview to predominate in some states and the other worldview to predominate in the other states would presumably give Americans greater peace. That's our conclusion. And I agree. In other words, what we're saying is America is changing. It's not the good old days from a Christian perspective. Progressives say, oh, it's getting better and better. We're getting rid of that pesky Christian worldview. But we're saying, listen, if you want peace in this country, you cannot keep having this one-size-fits-all draconian approach on a lot of these areas. You've got to allow space. And so what we would see happen is America, the geography of America, or not geography, the demography of America would change. Demography and population. In other words, you'd start seeing pockets of more conservative areas of our country, even more so in Texas, even more so in Florida perhaps, even more so in perhaps the Bible Belt, and you would see a migration towards more leftist, progressive leaning perhaps on the coastlands. I mean, they currently are, but we would say probably more. But we would say, well, I guess the pushback would be, well, wouldn't this lead to a more divided America? Well, we're at kind of a similar stage as America was in the 1850s. Wouldn't this provide for more peace? Okay, it's an imperfect reformation we're advocating, but we think it's the best way possible constitutionally to allow the people to have a voice and the people to decide. Okay, does that make sense? That's our solution. Questions, thoughts? Like it, don't like it, or just too much to think about in the last waiting minutes of this class?
A lot to think about.
Well, I like the fact that because, when DeVos was put over as cabinet first.
Yeah, education.
Education, and I thought, well, then why isn't she doing something in Texas? Why isn't she doing something in this state and not realizing my brain had gone to the federal government rules us,
Yeah.
not the state.
Yeah.
And so now understanding that, yes, we've lost some of that to the federal government as a state, we need to get back to the state.
Yeah. And Christians need to understand this generally. We want a Christian America. Okay, yeah, obviously I want Christian influence in America and all over the place. But from a constitutional perspective, the founders realized, again, remember, the biggest persecutors of other Christians in America, in the colonies, were other Christians in America. So we don't do it well. Okay, so that's why Jimmy Madison and Jefferson and the others, let federalism, let each state do it that way. That's the fairest way. So then you can each pick whatever you want. And they had no problem with national churches in states. The last national church in a state was gone in the 1830s. But you could still, the Constitution provides for that if you want it. If you don't want it, you don't have to have it. So yeah, my hope with this, and I was hoping more of our people would take this class, could be more, because Christians need to be more informed on this. As we're advocating for a Christian worldview in America, we need to do it constitutionally, and I believe this is the fairest way to do it. I mean, yes, would God violate federalism if he came and brought a revival in America? Yes! Do it!
Right.
Duh! But the point is, we've still got to operate in the real world in a, what they call a pluralistic society with multiple worldviews competing. And we're saying, because of that, we're looking at reality going, okay, because all these worldviews competing, a one-size-fits-all approach no longer works if you're going to have peace in this country. And a big problem with government right now, on both sides of the aisle, is the average American doesn't think they have a voice. What can I do? I can't possibly do anything. And in my opinion, the Supreme Court has gummed up the works by taking over these cases in areas that, quite frankly, they did not need to put their nose in it. Remember, I've said this quote many times, but I'll say it again. What James Madison says in Federalist 51. What is government but the greatest of all reflections upon human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls would be needed. In framing a government that is to be administered men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must enable the government to control the governed, and here's the punchline, and oblige the government to control itself. Madison said that. We need to oblige the government to control itself. Are you saying that the Supreme Court has no self-control, Pastor Eric? Yes, that's what I'm boldly saying. The Supreme Court has had no self-control since the Civil War on social issues, binding the states with a one-size-fits-all approach and violating the spirit of the Constitution by using the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment and using that as, hey, everyone's liberty needs to be recognized by the Supreme Court, and weakening the federalism and state and local governments and communities and the people's voice and democracy as a result. And that's why we made this decision.
See where we're at with it. That's where we're at.
So the checks and balances are Congress was supposed to rule over the Supreme Court.
Well, Congress can limit it. In other words, Congress, yes, I mean, the Supreme, okay, we've got what are called three co-equal branches. They're all equal. The Congress, Article 1, Executive Branch, Article 2, Courts, Article 3. That no one's higher than the other. But what they do is they have the ability to interpose or interject sometimes when necessary. One way is for Congress, which can fund the courts, which can create the courts, which can set appellate jurisdiction of the courts, which can set the dollar value of civil rights cases and things like that. Congress has the right to do all of that in Article 1, Section 8, and in Article 3. So they in other words, the framers set it up so that it's like it's a system of checks and balances even within the government.
But we haven't done that.
No, the Congress has not done this, and they've got the power. In other words, the Supreme Court is strong in areas where it should be weak, and Congress is weak in areas where it should be strong, because that represents the people. What are you saying, Pastor E or Professor G, if I was talking to students? I'm saying we no longer have Republican government in our country. Republican, small r. What is Republican government? The people ruling. Because if Congress was limiting an appellate jurisdiction, that's telling me that the people are ruling. They're ruling through the Congress. That's how it's supposed to be done. The people are limiting the Supreme Court where it's overstepping its bounds, its constitutional bounds. So we no longer have Republican small r government where we feel like we actually have a voice in it.
So people were all into this sphere of influence. Should start in the Congress, because it's going to have to take a while for you to get bipartisan and stuff.
Yeah, but that's how it's, well, yeah, time is going to slip away from us. But first of all, I would say people need to do what God told them to do. In other words, I wouldn't even look so much. Yes, strategy is important, but what is God telling you to do? If God's not telling you to get involved in Congress, don't do it. Do what God's told you to do. number one. Number two, that means everybody's got to do their own part. The church has got to, in other words, politics is downstream from culture, okay? In other words, what influences politics? Congress, culture. What is supposed to influence culture? The church. So the church has got to step up and do their own thing, because the church, if we're shining our light bright enough, it's going to cause culture to go, you know what? Maybe marriage is between a man and a woman. Maybe little kids actually need a mom and dad. Maybe an inherently sterile relationship should not have the blessing of government on it because it does not produce flourishing families in the way that God designed. Okay? In other words, if that can be influencing culture, that can be influencing your local congressman. And that can be influencing your Supreme Court justice. So there's all kinds of work to be done. Again, I would say this very clearly. World change begins with the fruit of our obedience. Do what God told you to do. It was a little bitty rabbi named the Apostle Paul who was trying to minister in modern-day Turkey, and the Spirit of God said, no, 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 no. And he had a vision of a man from Macedonia, and he said, come here. And the Holy Spirit led him to go into modern-day Greece, which is Europe, and came to America, and the rest is history. In other words, that one act of obedience changed the world. In other words, yes, strategize. Did Paul have a grand strategy to reach America? No, he didn't. He just did what the Holy Ghost told him to do. That's what I'm running with. That's what I tell anybody. Okay? Yes, there's lots to be done in the government. There's a mess in a lot of areas, but what is God telling you to do? Would I like to run for Congress? Yeah. Would I like to be a Supreme Court justice? Yeah. Would I like to be a president? Yeah. God never told me to. So until he tells, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just, we can all have desires and dreams, and that's cool. But the ultimate is, what is God telling you to do? Stay in your lane. Do it with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. All right, we're going to close for today. I hope you enjoyed this. And if you got any questions or comments, reach out to me, Pastor Eric at lmcc.church. Have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day. Take care.